Welcome back, 34 past the hour. It is so great to see conservatives in Washington standing firmly against Obamacare because our time is running out to stop this monstrosity of a law. And as you know, Senator Mike Lee of Utah has been among those leading the charge. He is calling upon Congress with some other conservatives to pass a year-end continuing resolution that would fund the government, but bar any spending that would help to implement Obamacare. And who knows why there are people who don't think this is a good strategy. I think it's a great strategy. And we're going to chat right now with Senator Lee, who has written a new ebook, Why John Roberts Was Wrong About Health Care. Senator Lee, it's just wonderful to welcome you back. How are you?
Doing great, Janet. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
It is my honor, and I want to thank you just as an American citizen for doing what you're doing. I just can't imagine what people are thinking trying to dissuade you from doing what your plan is all about here. But explain to people why it's so critical to go to the mat on the defunding issue.
Okay, so one of the few pieces of leverage that Congress has is the power of the purse. And we are going to be having a vote between now and September 30th on funding government. And what we have the ability to do as a Congress is to say we want to fund everything else in government except Obamacare.
Right.
Because this law is going to be bad for the American people. It will make health care more expensive for the American people. It's being implemented in an unfair manner, and we should refuse to fund it. Because, among other things, the president has said he's not even going to implement it as it was written.
Right, which makes sense. Now, there are those who say, yes, but what happens if the president vetoes it? And then what is the point of doing that? The GOP will have the political suicide issue in their camp. But really, wouldn't that really point to the president being the one who is to blame?
Well, yeah, I think so, especially since we've got a very unpopular law in Obamacare.
Right.
The majority of the American people are against it. 57% believe that it will make their family's health care situation worse, not better. And only 12% support the individual mandate, which has been rendered even more unfair by the president's decision not to enforce the employer mandate, but to enforce the individual mandate. And so, given the unpopularity of this law, I don't see how the president would win that battle. I don't see on what basis the president could say, yeah, I'm going to shut down the government just because I don't get everything I want.
Well, that's right. It's kind of interesting. I was reading a piece by Hans von Spakovsky at the Heritage Foundation, and he was making the point about the shutdown. Everybody who's worried about a shutdown, he was actually going back and saying when this happened back in the 90s, the long-term results of the government shutdown were leading up to a balanced budget and welfare reform for the Republicans, and they ended up gaining seats in the Senate from it. They lost a few seats in the House, but long-term, there were actually some very good benefits from an actual shutdown if that would occur.
Yeah, and, there were a lot of different circumstances. That was a different scenario in that they already had some aspects of government funded, but on the other hand, they were dealing with something very different than what we're dealing with now,
right,
in that they didn't have a really unpopular law that they were trying to defund,
right,
and we do. And that's why I don't think the American people would be perceiving that this would be anyone's fault but those who are determined to make sure Obamacare kicks in.
Well, and we keep hearing all this news you had mentioned before about the president and the employer mandate, and we've seen other things too. This week about the caps on out-of-pocket insurance costs will now be delayed for a year, and they've missed nearly a third of the deadlines that are specified by law under Obamacare. They're not even obeying the law on this. I mean, if this sort of trend continues, this thing is going to be completely out of control, not even getting into the whole issue of what it will do to the rest of us.
Yeah, that's right. And what this law creates is an incredible amount of uncertainty. The American people, by and large, are comfortable with the part of their current health care situation that they at least understand. Nobody understands where we're going with Obamacare, and it's being made more uncertain all the time. You mentioned the out-of-pocket exception that the president has created. That is a particularly nasty one because what that does is it creates kind of a teaser rate, if you will. It will keep premiums artificially low during the first year of Obamacare's implementation and conveniently until after we're out of the 2014 election cycle. As soon as those provisions kick in, premiums are going to go sky high, but it'll be too late to do anything about it, and that'll be the last midterm election of President Obama's presidency.
Do you believe that these delays really are, when it comes right down to it, ways of delaying the political pushback of Obamacare against Democrats?
It's hard for me to see it any other way. I know the president has his own explanation of it, although he hasn't been very anxious to talk much about it at all.
Right.
But it is impossible for me to look at this and to look at which provisions he's suspending and which provisions he's not suspending. It's hard for me to look at that and conclude anything other than that there are blatantly partisan motives behind these decisions.
Senator Mike Lee of Utah joining us. We'll talk more about Obamacare and why John Roberts was wrong about health care, his ebook. When we return, you're listening to The Janet Mefferd Show. And here is yet another reason why Obamacare needs to be put on the ash heap. The Department of Health and Human Services yesterday announced it's giving grants totaling over $655,000 to Planned Parenthood clinics. Wait a minute, I thought there wasn't going to be any federal funding for abortion in Obamacare. This is why we absolutely have to defund this law and dismantle it, but immediately we need to defund it. And leading the charge is Senator Mike Lee of Utah, who's been joining us. Senator Lee, you know, this is another thing that just drives people crazy. Not only the way that this law was passed, but we look at things like this. Oops, well, we had to pass the bill to find out what's in it. And now we find out, oh, we're getting, almost $750,000 given to Planned Parenthood clinics when we were told there wasn't going to be any abortion funding in this.
Well, yeah, that's the way things work. The bigger government gets, the less control the people have over it. The bigger a particular law or federal program becomes, the same thing happens. And a lot more controversial things are embedded in this program than anyone was led to believe. This is yet another manifestation of that.
It sure is. Now, what happens, just out of curiosity, if the House does not defund Obamacare now? Is this the last-ditch effort? What happens if we don't do it now?
Well, then the law is going to go ahead and take effect. You'll have the exchanges going online as of October 1st, and then as of January 1st, this coming year, 2014, all of a sudden the individual mandate will kick in, and most of the law's other provisions will kick in. So it's the last chance, it's the last stop on the Obamacare Express train between now and the time the law takes effect. That doesn't mean that there's no opportunity to repeal it after that. But we know from our experience, Janet, that it becomes infinitely more difficult to get rid of a new entitlement program once it kicks in, once it takes effect. That's what we're trying to stop. You know, you've got death, taxes, and major entitlements. Those are very permanent things in our society.
Yeah, the sure things.
So what I'm saying is if we don't defund it now, it's going to be really, really hard to do it down the road.
Yeah, it's got to be done. Now, you had mentioned the individual mandate, and I know you've got this great book out, Why John Roberts Was Wrong About Health Care. He, famously gave this decision in approving Obamacare and the individual mandate. You believe, though, that this was not actually what the Chief Justice probably wanted initially. What is your theory about why he ruled the way he did on the Obamacare case last year?
Well, as I explained in Why John Roberts Was Wrong About Health Care, which, by the way, it's a quick, easy read. It's like 100 pages. You can download it on Amazon for $3.99, on iTunes for $3.99. My theory is that he initially was inclined to stick with the conservatives and changed his vote just a few weeks before the opinion was issued. And that's how that's when he came up with this crazy theory that the court should effectively, as I see it, rewrite two aspects of Obamacare. One, they rewrote the individual mandate, which was enacted as a penalty. They tried to enact it as a tax, but they couldn't get the votes. They rewrote it as a tax in order to make it constitutional. Yep. Because they found, well, it was written as a penalty, but it's unconstitutional that way, so we're just going to deem it to be a tax. That's wrong. They don't have the power to do that. Number two, they found that it was unconstitutional for Congress to tell the states that they had no choice but to expand their Medicaid programs. The Supreme Court looked at that and said, yeah, that's unconstitutional. The overwhelming majority of the justices agreed. But then 5 of them, with Chief Justice Roberts leading the charge, they wrote into the law a carve-out so that states could opt out of that. Congress didn't enact it that way. That's not supposed to be how the Supreme Court works. They should have just invalidated that provision and then proceeded to figure out whether or not they could save the rest of the statute along with it.
Well, a lot of people have had the same conjecture that you do about Chief Justice Roberts, that he was pressured, that he was possibly intimidated into that decision. What do you think actually may have happened behind the scenes? Who was doing the pressuring? Who was doing the intimidating?
Well, my theory is that it was not actually behind the scenes. It was in broad daylight. You had Democrats in the Senate and in the House, and you also had the White House publicly making statements to the effect that Chief Justice Roberts had better not be an activist and invalidate President Obama's signature legislative accomplishment. If he does, that's going to tarnish his record in the history books, and he won't want to be known or remembered as an activist Chief Justice. He will want to be known and remembered as an even-handed, apolitical justice. And according to press accounts, credible press accounts indicating that he switched his vote, he appears to have switched his vote at about the same time in May 2012 when those same statements were escalating.
Well, it's kind of funny if you want to appear in the long run of history as a neutral judge who's just using the law. I think he undid that. I mean, I think long-term people will look at that decision and say, what in the world were you doing? How in the world did you come to that conclusion when you actually look at the Constitution?
That's exactly right. And one of the things that I explain in Why John Roberts Was Wrong About Health Care is that it is just as bad for a jurist to refuse to invalidate an unconstitutional law as it is for a jurist to invalidate a law that is not unconstitutional. So, both of them are equally bad. It's not a question of activism versus passivism. It's just, good judging versus bad. Supposed to decide each case based on the law and the facts before the court and nothing else. And that appears not to have happened in this case because the court went against the plain text of the statute and it rewrote the statute not just once but twice in order to save it.
Well, to the issue of the Obama administration delaying some of these specifications under Obamacare, what can Congress do to rein in the administration on this? If they are not meeting, things under the law that are specified, that they must meet these deadlines on the employer mandate and so forth, people are seeing this as lawlessness. What can be done by Congress?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Janet, because that's one of the most important questions in all of this discussion. The answer is the only thing Congress can do, and it may well be that the only thing anyone can do, is for Congress to defund the law's implementation. Congress's power of the purse may well be the only tool that we can use that can take effect in enough time to make a difference. Now, there are a lot of people out there, including Karl Rove, who have suggested, oh, no, let's not try this funding route. We ought instead to be going a different route, and we ought to be filing a lawsuit. Well, lawsuits are great in certain circumstances, but whereas here you've got a case in which, number one, it's going to be hard to find anyone with standing to challenge it, and two, even once you've found someone with standing to challenge it, if you can get there in time, you're going to run out of time to challenge it. We've got 1 year to get this thing done, and most federal court litigation can't be decided in 1 year.
Utah Senator Mike Lee, author of Why John Roberts Was Wrong About Healthcare. I salute you, Senator Lee, and I was just so glad you could be with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Janet.
All right, you take care. We'll be back.